Welcome to Constructing the Carolinas, a show where we explore the growth of our communities, cities, and counties across North Carolina and figure out what's on the horizon. We are brought to you by Barnhill, which has been constructing the Carolinas since 1949. I'm your host, Valerie Bono, Director of Business Development. Today, North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction, Catherine Truitt, joins us for a conversation around the strategic plan for education in our state, how things have changed since the pandemic, reading and math proficiency, the LETTERS program, letter grades, and some of the challenges of rural education. Catherine is an educator first, having spent the first part of her career as a high school English teacher. Later, she served as a senior advisor on education to North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory from 2015 to 2017. And now she's been elected to serve as Superintendent of Public Instruction since January 2nd of 2021. In her job as State Superintendent, Catherine has quite a bit of power, but not the amount some parents think she has.
Folks don't know that while academic standards are set at the state level and voted on by the State Board of Education, curriculum choices, which is the how and the what every day of how those standards get implemented, that occurs at the local level. And so either local boards of education or a principal at a school, they are the ones determining what curricula will be used to make sure that students are knowing and able to do what those academic standards set forth. And so if I'm a parent and my child comes home and says that they were learning about X, Y, and Z, and a parent is upset about that, and they email me and they say, this teacher said X, Y, and Z, please do something about this. I have no authority to tell that teacher what he or she can and cannot say in the classroom.
So now that Catherine has told us what the state superintendent is not, let's get into what she does do and some of the challenges we're facing in the North Carolina public school system.
When I took office, schools were closed and due to the pandemic. And that while learning was occurring online, we know from data that all groups of students, regardless of grade, regardless of race and ethnicity, regardless of gender, suffered learning loss during the pandemic. And so I worked with the legislature and with the Department of Health and Human Services to allow schools to reopen sooner rather than later. And that's something that I'm very proud of. Then it was time, because I took office in January of 2021, to put together a strategic plan. And that strategic plan needed to focus not just on what was happening or would happen coming out of the pandemic with learning loss, but also, Valerie, we had some very startling statistics in terms of academic achievement prior to the pandemic, namely in reading and math, where about 67% of our students, both in reading and in math, our eighth graders were starting high school not able to read proficiently or do math proficiently. 67% not able. And that has a knock-on effect when a student decides what they want to do after high school. That could prevent them from pursuing a 2 or a 4-year degree, or prevent them from going into the field of their choice without a degree. I mean, a person can get a coding certificate and get a great job, but they do have to understand a certain level of math. So we put together Operation Polaris, which is the strategic vision for education in the state. And the first thing that we did was tackle our reading and our reading challenges. So in the 80s and 90s, this country largely moved away from the way that many of us, if we are over 50, learned to read, and that was through phonics. And what we know from 2 decades of research now is that the brain learns to read by matching sounds to letter symbols. Reading is actually not a visual activity. It's an aural, A-U-R-A-L activity. And the dominant form of instruction for the past 2 decades across the country has been a visual approach to teaching kids to read. Look at the picture and remember that the picture and the word match. And that is just not how the brain, we are hardwired to learn to speak. We are not hardwired to learn to read as humans. So I worked with the legislature in April of 2021. We passed legislation that would require and pay for all pre-K through fifth grade teachers in North Carolina to undergo a very rigorous professional development called LETTERS, which is grounded in the science of reading and is a phonics-based approach to early literacy instruction. And I'm very excited to say that our kindergarten through third grade data show that when it comes to early literacy foundational skills, our students are outperforming the rest of the country.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
That is incredible. Literacy is so important.
Yes.
And I'm glad to see that was a huge initiative that you focused on. Yeah.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, that's great. So what are some of the challenges you've seen in education, especially in rural counties within your tenure as superintendent?
Yeah, that's such a fantastic question. We are the ninth largest state in the country. We are so large, it takes 9 hours to drive from Murphy to Manteo. It's a huge state. And about 80% of North Carolina is rural, that's right, as you mentioned. So for education specifically, education is a very decentralized endeavor. And that's okay, because what works in Wake County isn't going to work in Duplin County, for example. But I think that one of the challenges is that some of our smaller rural counties have less support in their central offices than our larger counties. And so I think it's harder to solve for big challenges when you have a small team. And so the department has really tried to come alongside our smaller districts, especially with the $6.5 billion that North Carolina received from the federal government just for COVID recovery in K-12 education. We've really tried to come alongside and help our rural counties. But at the same time, I think, the fact that kids are spread out in a county and something like busing can take so long. Schools that might need to be consolidated in our rural counties, they can't, but because the kids are too far away from wherever that new school would be. So lots of challenges in our rural counties, but my administration has very much prioritized visiting rural counties. There is life past Asheville and there is life past Johnston County. And so, east of I-95. So we've really made an effort to go to those districts and hear what their specific challenges are, because again, they are very different than our urban areas.
Sure. Can you dive in a little deeper about some of the specific challenges that they may face?
Well, for one thing, if a child is attending school in a district that is losing population, which we do have districts that are losing population, they are going to be less likely to have teachers that have maybe completed an accredited educator prep program. Having fully licensed teachers that have come through a traditional preparation route, which we know produces the best outcomes. We have data that tells us those teachers produce the best outcomes for students academically. It's not to say those teachers care any less than any other teacher, but they've maybe not have had all of the expert training and education that other teachers may have had. So that's one thing. How do you find an AP physics teacher in a district that's losing population? And so we do have the North Carolina Virtual Public Instruction Virtual School, NCVPS, Virtual Public School. And it has been nationally recognized for quality. And so if a student does want to take an AP physics class in Halifax County, she can enroll in NCVPS and get incredible instruction. It will be virtual. And I think virtual education, which occurred during the pandemic, left a bad taste in people's mouths. But what we offer through virtual public school is very different than what we had to have teachers do when they just had to flip a switch and go virtual. So we always want to encourage our rural districts to take advantage of NCVPS. But yeah, that human capital challenge is very difficult. I think another myth, Valerie, is that our rural districts have less money, have less funding than our urban districts. And the truth is that some of our rural counties are the highest funded in the state, because the way we fund public schools in North Carolina is that everyone gets the same base amount, which is about $7,200 right now from the state. It might be a little bit more than that now, but it's around $7,200. And then for every child you have who is low income, you get another allotment. For every child you have who is an English language learner, there is another allotment. For every child you have who is has an individual like a learning challenge or learning difference, you get another amount of money. And so consequently, while our small rural districts may see less in local dollars, the bulk of funding in North Carolina comes from the state. Unlike many neighbors to the north who, in other states, the bulk of the funding comes from local property taxes. It's actually the opposite in North Carolina.
Oh, that's fascinating. So picking up off of that, right, from the monetary standpoint. So the North Carolina Department of Instruction was recently awarded $7.9 million to address math disparities in rural schools. So can you share a little bit more about that program and the Department of Instruction's initiative called Patterns for reaching and impacting students in Math Prism?
Yeah, we're very excited about the Prism grant that we were just awarded, nearly $8 million, as you said. And it will specifically go to serve students in rural counties. It will go towards helping teachers serve those students better. This is important, again, because of what I said a few minutes ago. We might not have teachers in those rural areas who are specialists in math. And there might not be anyone at the central office who is a specialist in math. And furthermore, we don't have the same amount of research in elementary math education about what works and what are best practices that we do for reading. And so we will be in this grant contributing to that body of knowledge about what works. We also are participating with a grant that NC State got recently. Their dean got a grant that is going to specifically be looking at K-2 best practices in early math instruction. So North Carolina really is leading in this need that we have, not just as a state, but as a country, to stop normalizing mediocrity in math. It's perfectly acceptable for an adult to say, oh, I'm not very good at math. I say it once a week, right? It would never be acceptable for an adult to say, oh, I'm not very good in reading. It shouldn't be acceptable to say it in math either. We have too much on the line. Too many jobs in the next 10 years and beyond are going to require math knowledge. And Math 1 readiness, or when we were younger, we called it Algebra 1. Math 1 readiness needs to be the gold standard for all children. All children need to be proficient in Math 1 by 8th or 9th grade. And then, not all kids need to take calculus. Some do, some do not. We need to make other kinds of math courses available to students, like data analytics or statistics, data science. There are jobs that require that kind of knowledge and information, maybe more so than calculus.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing that. And also I appreciate you mentioning, right, North Carolina's leading in education, but we're also leading, I see you brought a prop here.
Yes.
Number 1 for business education, right, is supporting that. Right? Students need to learn certain skills to fill the jobs that are coming here. But it's really good that you're looking at it from both literacy and math. And it's a huge focus for the future.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit more. We're talking about doing business, education. It's all tied together, especially with workforce. So there's many stats and a census report recently showing a decline in the young population and an upward trend in seniors specifically. So how's the North Carolina Department of Instruction addressing this and working with that shift, if you will, in the population?
Yes, those who work in economic development have to be concerned about the silver tsunami, all of the older folks who are going to retire. And are we preparing our graduates to take their place, so to speak, or to be able to come into jobs where content doesn't reign, but skills maybe are paramount? One of the statistics that has concerned me for several years now that we have been very intentional about working on at the department is we know that we've got about an 86, 87, 88% high school graduation rate on average in North Carolina. But for every 100 kids that graduate from high school in North Carolina, only 30 will get any kind of 2 or 4 year degree or a credential of workforce value, like a truck driver's license or a welding certificate, by the time they're 24 years old.
Wow.
So what's happening in those 6 years that students are not engaging in doing anything after high school? I mean, that says to me that the system of education that we have is really only working for the kids who are going to go to college. And we cannot have a system like that. There are many pathways to the middle class that don't involve a 4-year residential college degree. And we need to stop telling all students that the only pathway to the middle class is with a 4-year residential college degree. Our workforce has been changing rapidly even before the pandemic, and I think the pandemic accelerated those changes. So what we did was we looked at establishing workforce goals. We worked with the North Carolina Chamber to do a workforce toolkit because we hear from businesses all the time, what can we do about this? How can we get engaged? We also created something called the Portrait of a Graduate, which is statewide, and it was done through a grassroots effort where we included folks from all 8 regions of the state, not just teachers and principals, but also parents, students, the faith-based community, as well as employers. And we said, what are the top 7 or 8 skills, durable skills that students need to have no matter what they're going to do after high school in order to be successful in life? We started off with 72 and we narrowed it down to 7. Those 7 durable skills are adaptability, collaboration, communication, critical thinking, empathy, personal responsibility, and learner's mindset. Those are the 7 competencies that, aside from all the academic content that students learn in school, that these need to be developed starting in kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. We have been working with a nonprofit that will allow us to give teachers materials that they can use to infuse. We don't want to make more work for teachers, certainly, but we're giving them activities and rubrics that they can use to infuse this in their daily instruction, because all students are on a career journey, even kindergartners. All students are on a career journey. And then finally, what I will say is we passed legislation in this last long session that requires all students to develop a career plan, starting in the 7th grade. And the reason that I felt so strongly about this, Valerie, is because we are getting ready to share next month with the State Board of Education a report that we do as per legislation every year called the Credential Attainment Report. And it shows us how many career and technical education credentials, like in agriculture, hospitality, allied health, culinary arts, auto repair, how many credentials are students, did they take a test to earn a credential? How many are they earning every year? That report is going to show that the number of credentials attained is the highest in state history. And yet, we've got that 30% statistic, 30% getting any kind of career credential or 2 or 4 year degree by the time they're 24. We think that a career development plan that's signed off on by parents starts in the 7th grade, that's just exploration. There's all kinds of software that districts are already using to help kids explore what kinds of careers exist besides being a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer, our popular jobs. What else is out there? Solar panel installation. How much can I earn doing that? It turns out a lot. That career plan will follow students to high school and will be revisited in the 10th grade. And teachers and counselors and parents will make sure that kids are on the right track with their courses and that someone is following up with these kids to say, okay, you're a senior now. Have you enrolled in what? I don't think most kids know that their local community college automatically enrolls them. They can do that. So and a Pell Grant based on income will more than cover community college tuition. So it's something that could be affordable for all children.
Absolutely. We had Butch Lauder and Chris Johnson on with Johnston County, and they were talking about JCC, right? And if you grow up in Johnston County, you can go. They can help pay for community college.
That's exactly right. And no one in North Carolina lives more than 30 minutes away from a community college. They are the hidden gem in our state's quest to make sure that we are producing the workforce so that we can stay number one for business. I've heard folks get criticize education for calling out that number one for business, but being number one for business gives us the best shot at having healthy and happy communities where people can thrive and people can live the life that they want to live because there is value in all work.
Absolutely. And I also really appreciate what you said, 7th grade, right? That's the age where these students are going to start putting together this career plan. And we're seeing that too on the construction side, right? When we're trying to talk to students, a lot of times you're hearing companies go to the college students to talk about their industry as a career. It's too late.
It's too late.
So we try to go out to the grade schools, starting at middle school, even elementary school, to say, hey, construction's an excellent choice. You could be very successful working in construction, similar, right? So I'm glad that you recognize 7th grade. It's younger than high school, younger than college.
Yes. 100%. That's exactly what we need to do.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So piggybacking off of that, let's talk about workforce a little bit more. You've collaborated with some community colleges, school districts, economic development, which we've already talked about, to ensure that state workforce demands were being met. What trends are you seeing both within the Department of Education and within some of those other groups like the community colleges or
trends in workforce development?
Yes.
I'm hearing the construction trades really step up and say, hey, come look at us. I'm going to Perquimans County tomorrow to meet with several local superintendents in the Northeast, and the Be Pro, Be Proud group is going to be there at the high school, helping kids know what is available in the construction trades, how much it pays. Oh my goodness, it pays so well. And how you can get those credentials. I mean, I went to a high school in Davie County that had a masonry lab.
Oh, wow.
It was incredible. And the kids actually laying bricks. It was really fun to do. And then, of course, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools has their ROC, where kids are learning electrical and other kinds of carpentry trade. Iredell County has a career and technical education center that includes construction trades where kids leave their high school for half the day and come there. I am seeing, in particular, our rural communities kind of step up and make sure that kids have these opportunities. And I think that's a very positive trend. And the more we can see those programs partner with the local community college, the better. And I think I don't want to speak for the community college system, but I do hear frequently that they have to find people, and it's true in the high schools too, to teach those courses when those people could be making more money if they were just working in the construction trades. Same with computer science, which you do not have to have a computer science degree to get a great job in programming or coding. Those are all certificates that one can earn. And in fact, computer science is now a high school graduation requirement in North Carolina. We worked really hard to get that through because looking, as you're saying, when you look at these trends, you see that that's where the jobs are going to be. AI might replace some jobs, but it's also going to create jobs. And so we have to make sure that our kids going down to middle school are prepared to go in the direction of where the jobs are going to be.
I could not agree more with you. So let's pivot a little bit. Let's shift gears. So I want to talk a little bit more about needs-based grants. So you see the value of needs-based grants, and in 2022, there was over $300 million awarded in needs-based school construction grants.
Yes.
So are there any efforts coming up for additional funding?
Yes. So far, Over the past 3 years since I've been in office, the General Assembly has appropriated both through the general fund and the lottery, the NC lottery, which goes to school construction, over $1 billion. Now, the need, because we track this need in the state, the need is about $8 billion. And for your listeners, capital outlay is a local responsibility. That's in law. But the capital needs-based grants are an opportunity for the state to come alongside counties where they might not have enough taxing ability to be able to generate the income that is needed to do school renovations and repairs as well as build new schools. There is a separate renovation repair fund that comes from the General Assembly and the lottery. But then there's also, as you mentioned, these huge grants that can be given to districts. So I have awarded about $1 billion so far, and there is another $258 million that I am getting ready to award. The deadline for the applications was late last week. Those awards will be anywhere from $32 million for an elementary school, $42 million for a middle school, 42 for elementary, 52 for middle, 62 for high school. And then there will be some smaller projects that I'll be able to fund, like getting rid of trailers and doing additions, maybe for $10 million, something like that. So we're very excited to be able to make these awards. When I look at, there is criteria in legislation that I have to look at when deciding who is going to get these awards. And one of the things that I look at is a district's or a county's ability to generate tax revenue. And we use an algorithm where we say, okay, if they raise property taxes a penny, how much money would that generate? And we have counties that if they raised it by a penny, it would only generate about $45,000. All the way up to, I think, Wake County, it would generate $3.7 million. I'm looking at counties that have certainly Tier 1 economic status, maybe Tier 2. And then I'm looking at their tax-to-debt ratio. I'm looking at, I can prioritize a district if they're going to consolidate, which is always an unpopular decision, almost always. I'll tell you, last year, Halifax County got $50 million from this grant, and it's actually a really neat story. They needed to tear down a school that had been there for a long time, Eastman High School, and it went back to days of segregation. That's how old the school was. And normally, tearing down a high school is an incredibly unpopular decision. But this community found a way to bring people together. They had a ceremony before the groundbreaking of the new building, and they invited all alumni from this high school to come and participate in the groundbreaking. And there were, I think there were 1,000 people there. I was able to go and be a part of it. Folks from up and down the Eastern Seaboard came back to this reunion of sorts. So they've broken ground and are going to build a new high school there.
Sure. I love that you're bringing the community together, right?
Yes.
Because you're talking about the history, how it impacted a lot of families, especially segregation, right? But now you're looking towards the future.
Yes.
And what is it going to do for the next generation and what it's going to mean to the community and people for generations to come, right? So
that's right.
That's
a brand
excellent.
new school building does so much to boost the morale of a community.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So what challenges exist within the education space over the next 10 to 20 years, right? You're looking at today, you're looking at the future.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges? You have your crystal ball. What are you seeing?
Yeah, and I think about that all the time because if I'm lucky to be in office for another 4 years, that's someone could, come along and feel differently about how I feel about education. And so I do think about what can we do that's sustainable, that's not just going to be a flash in the pan, but it's going to have real lasting change. I do think the Science of Reading Initiative, that return to phonics, which does sit in legislation, that is a game changer because we're talking about changing the trajectory of kids' lives to make sure that they can read. Because, of course, I say 67% start high school not reading proficiently. You can imagine how disproportionately that impacts economically challenged families. I think that we have got to get a handle on math. That is really, I think, my biggest challenge right now is how we saw such huge declines during the pandemic on our math scores. We have seen a big bounce back, but bouncing back to what? It wasn't great before. I will be sharing with the legislature this coming short session, which starts at the end of April, a plan for a statewide policy framework for math that will provide supports for teachers to make sure that teachers who might be feeling a little math phobic in elementary school have the supports that they need to teach math. We have to keep our finger on the pulse of making sure that we're preparing kids for the jobs of the future. I think there's a lot of things that we've laid the foundation for, we've put in place, and now we have to support districts in being able to do that work. I think that school funding is going to continue to, not necessarily the how much, although for some it will be how much, but also how. I am of the belief that after a basic floor, it's not how much, it's how are you aligning the resources to the need, or are you aligning the resources to the need? And I don't know that we are. I mean, New York is spending $38,000 per student right now on that's their per pupil expenditure. That's more than most private schools. There's always going to be this argument about, well, how much is enough? But I think it really is more about looking at outcomes rather than inputs, or outputs rather than inputs. I say that, but at the same time, it's cost about $100 million to turn the ship around with the science of reading, to provide all that training. Now, it won't be $100 million in perpetuity. That's going to end up having been a one-time lump sum to make sure that teachers have the professional development they need. But our colleges of education have also had to pivot. So our teachers will be graduating knowledgeable in the science of reading.
Sure. And for our listeners, just to put it in perspective, New York is spending over $3,000 per student. Do you know what North Carolina?
So yeah, $38,000 per student in New York, and we are at about $8,200 per student. Okay. But again, in Wake County, if the average per pupil expenditure is $7,900 a year, in Hyde County, it's $18,000 per year. So there is so much variance. And that doesn't include the supports that come from Health and Human Services as well. So that's just K-12 education.
Wow. So we've talked a lot about a lot of different things, a lot of exciting topics. But I'm curious, what are you most excited about that's on the horizon?
Well, I'm very excited about seeing how the investment in our teachers for the science of reading is going to impact students as they get older. Mm-hmm. So we've just seen recently, we've looked at our third grade end of grade scores, and we're seeing that's actually been the bright spot in pandemic recovery. So we know those investments are paying off, and now, next year we're going to see it with fourth graders, and the year after that, fifth grade. Now, we do need to provide some professional development for our middle grades teachers around literacy, and I will be going to the General Assembly for that as well. I'm really excited about the career development plans and the idea that we can change the narrative that the purpose of third grade is to get ready for fourth grade, and the purpose of fourth grade is to get ready for fifth grade. No, the purpose of third grade is to prepare students for the post-secondary plans of their choice. And I think that the portrait of a graduate and those competencies, giving teachers permission, because I think a lot of teachers were doing this kind of thing already. And again, I can't force teachers to do this, but we've got some districts that have built their strategic plan around the portrait of a graduate. And I think that showing schools how they can define their purpose has been very powerful. With that, I would say that one of the things that educators are most frustrated about is the way we grade schools. And as per state law, every school has a letter grade. And that letter grade is determined solely by test scores, end of grade test scores that take place on one day of the year or at the end of the semester, if you're in high school. I think it's a very common feeling that amongst educators that there are other things that schools should be measured on. We do need to measure schools on academic outcomes, but we also need to measure schools on other ways that they serve students. And we are going to be presenting to the legislature a plan to provide 4 letter grades, to provide more transparency for parents so that they understand better where their school is excelling and where their school might not be excelling. Chronic absenteeism is a problem in our state right now. 30% of kids are chronically absent, which means they're missing more than 18 days of school per year. I think schools should be graded on chronic absenteeism. What is their rate of chronic absenteeism? You can't control for all things, but there are certainly things that schools can do to decrease the number of kids who are chronically absent. I think most schools do an amazing job of helping students find those career and technical education opportunities. Let's highlight that on the student report card. Is the school a safe place? Do teachers like being there? That's something that we should be highlighting. So we look forward to bringing that to the legislature in the spring. I think the consequences of only measuring academic outcomes are that teachers do nothing but worry about those tests. And we want for teachers to be able to focus on more than just those tests.
Sure. I am really excited to see what can come in the future. I have family members who are educators, and I know, they've talked about the pressure with the end of year testing, right, and what that means for their school and all of that. So I think that's really great. Also, it's alarming to hear 30% of chronic absenteeism.
Yes, that is up about 7 percentage points coming out of the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are there any root causes of that? Are we seeing any trends or why that number is so high and growing?
So some of it is attributed to high school kids who started working during the pandemic and or kids that just aren't finding value in being in high school, which we need to work on for sure.
Sure. All right. So I don't want to let you go without doing a few fun questions.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, they're getting to know you, right? What is a hidden talent that you have?
Well, I actually am a classical pianist.
Really?
I am. I grew up playing the piano, and I went to a public arts high school in Cincinnati where I grew up and played the piano through college. I don't have a lot of time now to keep up, and someday I will return to that. But I had an amazing experience at my arts high schools, just like Fame for your older listeners. I love all kinds of music, but I really do love classical music.
Do you have a favorite song that you enjoy playing on the piano?
So my competition piece, my junior year of high school, was Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. So if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you pick and why?
Right now, I'd like to go someplace warm, but I have, when we were stationed in London, which we were with the Navy for 4 years, we did get to travel a little bit. One place I never went to that I would really love to go to is Prague in the Czech Republic. So that is definitely on my bucket list for someday.
I hear it's incredible. I've never been myself, but I keep hearing it's stunning, beautiful.
Yes.
There's not a bad view when you're there.
Yes. I actually just watched a Polish crime drama that's new on Netflix that takes place in this. I did not know that Poland had mountains. And so, but that they do. And it was incredible scenery. Now I'm kind of tempted to know, well, I wonder if that's place that people go and visit because it was very beautiful to look at. Yeah.
Well, final question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this. This podcast is Constructing the Carolinas. So if there was any one project that you would love to see get built here in North Carolina, and it could be anything, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to say multiple projects because I wish that all districts or districts in combination, that all kids had access to a career and technical education center, like the one I saw in Iredell, like the one that they're trying to build in Robeson County. There's one down in Jones County that is shared across a couple of districts there. Those are game changers for kids, and I wish that all high school students had access to a career and technical education center.
Well, Catherine, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for your time today and for sharing with our listeners. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Valerie. You asked great questions, and the pleasure was all mine.
Thank you. Thank you for listening or watching Constructing the Carolinas. We'll be back soon with a new episode, so be sure to press the follow button on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. And check out what Barnhill is doing to construct the Carolinas. You can find us at barnhillcontracting.com, and you can follow us on LinkedIn as well. This podcast is edited and produced by Earfluence. I'm Valerie Bono, and as we construct the Carolinas and as we build this podcast, I encourage you to keep building and growing as well. See you next time.